Hello and welcome to tenant rights. So you want to learn a little bit about what your rights are as a tenant, and sometimes it really sucks because you have a really bad landlord or you got into a really bad contract. What rights do you have? But before we get into it, I like to give a little historical development so you can kind of understand the problems facing you and some historical understanding of kind of where we got here. Now, it's kind of a weird concept to think that you own something, right? That's a weird thing. It's not you. It's something else that exists in the world. But yet, under the law, we say that object is yours. Now, where did property law come from? Where did the concept come from? And I found this very fascinating doing some historical research myself, and I have two traditions here. And I like this because we have two islands on two different parts of the world around the same time. What were their traditions? So the English tradition in about 1066, William the Conqueror developed what we know as the feudal system. Okay, now this system was of course taken from other concepts of the time, but he brought it together, and basically it was you had a king, you had a monarch, he controlled everything. Now he gave estates and lands. You start seeing some familiar words, maybe if you see some, to your lords. So your lords had the right to, because of their nobility, to control lands, and so they were controlled mainly by the king, but they were given rights to lands, and then they would rent it out to the peasantry, and they were the people that actually worked the lands. Now, we very much controlled people and how they moved up in the social ladder. It was based upon who you were, your family was, your ties to nobility, whether you could move up. This was the system. Now, you would go, oh, that's such a horrific system. I can't believe humans did that. Well, on the other side of the world, at the exact same time, what we call the Philippines today, there's an island called Luzon. And back then, the Chinese called it Mai. And in that system, they had what was called the barangay system. And the barangay system was very similar to what the English had. You had the Manginu, which was the ruling class. These are the people that were in charge. Okay, this was usually a king, but they weren't as united as England was. You had a lot of the ruling class, and then over a barangay, you had a datu, and this is a person who was a friend who gave loyalty to the Manginu, and they are the people who got some extra privileges, kind of like a lord, you know. And then you had the low people, the alipin, which were the slaves, the serfs, very much like a serf system. Now, we use the word slave in peasantry, and it could be a brutal system. Most of the time when we think slavery, we think of the slavery that was performed in America, which was very much a very hostile version of slavery, and probably not a good association to make. I'm not saying that there wasn't. There was probably horrific to be a peasant in England back in the day, or to be a lowly slave in Luzon back in, before the Spanish showed up. So, in either thing, it's basically the same idea. So if two systems completely separate, evolve into this system over the years, it's probably how it's been for a very long time. So you go, well, why should I understand the historical system? Because it's basically the system today. It's the same system. In the United States, under real property laws, you have a government. Now the difference is we vote these people in. They don't just get there because they're born into it. We actually give them the power. And this is one of the great things of democracy, is it's not based upon your blood. It's based upon your ability to convince other people to vote for you, which sometimes works out and sometimes doesn't. But in any event, we have that. Now, what really changed, now we don't call them lords, we call them landlords. See where the name comes from? So the landlords are the landowner, and now you don't have to be noble. You don't have to have the blood to own the land. You just got to buy it. And this is the reality of our world now, is the capitalistic system that we developed changed from blood, or who you are, you deserve things, to who is going to actually buy it, who's the actual person that's going to use it. And then we have the tenants. Now you may go, oh, well, I'm the slave, I'm the guy at the bottom. Yes, but you're at the bottom because you choose to be at the bottom. You can get out of your situation. You just need to save up the money and work hard enough, and you'll get there. No, oh, well, no, you don't understand. No, I do understand your system, because I have dealt with the poorest of poor people who raised themselves out of the situation. Immigrants are usually the number one landlord owners in America because they work from the bottom. They'll work 2 or 3 jobs and work their way up. Now, we have a completely different system in, well, not completely different, very similar but not similar system in China. So under the Communist Party, how does it work? Well, you have the government. They're actually an elite group, and you kind of have to be in the end. You got to work your way into the one system political party. That's loyalty, money, however you want to get in. You got to buy your way into the system. It isn't a voting system like in America. And you could say, well, America's kind of like that. We just have 2 parties, and you kind of have to kiss a lot of butt to get into those parties. But they're kind of similar in that sense. But at least in America, we give multiple options. There's a feeling that you're actually getting a choice, unless it's this year with Trump or Biden, because I don't feel like I really have a choice. A guy who has dementia versus a lunatic. So, yeah, what am I? Now, for all you Trump supporters or Biden supporters, I understand you might be really into these guys. I'm just teasing with you. I could care less who wins this election because I think they're both puppets. And we have, in the Chinese system, the user. The user is the person who gets a contract for 70 years to use the land, and he contracted out to them. Because the government retains ownership of all property. It's kind of like a king. The government is the king. Now, the king is kind of voted in kind of thing, but in the end, they don't have like a lord system. They have a user, which is kind of like a lord. You buy the property from the government, and you have the right to use it and develop it. That's why you always see the videos go online of like a building falling apart in China, because they only want to build it for 70 years. They don't want to build anything permanent, because the more money you put into it, you're not getting any benefit out of it. So it creates a problem. We have problems in our system. As you can see, there's problems in every system. There's no perfect system out there. Okay, the leasehold estate. You go, well, what's the heck's up with the state? The leasehold estate. This has to come from the feudal system, and this is very important when you're a tenant. You need to understand what this is. Okay, it is a temporary right. When you have a leasehold estate, when you are leasing from somebody, you have a leasehold estate, and you have a right to hold the land, and you have a right to be on the property, use it for your benefit, and we consider this personal property. That's very important. Let's get to the next slide. What is real property versus personal property? Real property in our system, what we have developed, it used to mean something different back in the day, but today it means fixed things to land. So we consider real property to be the house, the land, anything that if you move it would significantly, or not significantly, would just devalue the property in such a way. It's traditionally not moved. Like if you go to England, I've been told that when tenants leave, they take the light bulbs, they take everything, because those aren't considered fixtures. In the United States, we would consider light bulbs and lights to be fixtures, and you're not supposed to remove that from the property. Personal property is completely separate. It's a movable item. It is my phone. This is personal property. And the laws differ on whether something's real and whether something's personal, because they have different things. Now, the lease. We got the evil lease, the landlord who's just so greedy, and they're just evil people. What it is, the lease is the document. So when you walk in this document you sign, it's the governing document between your relationship between you and your landlord. Now, of course, the landlords are the ones that present it. So who does it benefit? The landlord, because you would be an idiot to write a lease that benefits the tenant. Tenant. Why in the world would I buy a property, pay the tax on the property, take all the risk on the property, lease it out to someone to give them all the benefits? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to write a lease that's going to benefit me. Okay? Now, under the law, we don't care necessarily what the lease says if you're not doing certain things. We have what are called landlord duties. We don't let you treat your tenants just any way that you want to treat your tenant. You can't just do anything you want. So if you are a tenant right now, you want to listen very carefully. You have a right to have the property delivered to you. You show up and someone's squatting in the property, you don't have to evict that person. The landlord has to evict that person. And you shouldn't have, you're not required to pay anything during the time that it isn't provided to you, okay? You have a right to, so let's go to an implied warranty of habitability. We also went over time and realized, you know what? Landlords are in a better position to make sure property is actually habitable. We're not going to make the tenant go out there and check the property and make sure there's running water, make sure all those things. We're going to put that on the landlord. So power goes out is a great thing. Power is going to be out for a month on your property. Well, there's arguments there that it's no longer habitable, and you have a right to either go somewhere else and wait out the time and be reimbursed for your costs that you would have to go somewhere else. Or, if there's a riots going on down the street, it's like, well, it might not be habitable because of something, and you have a right to move on, and the landlord has to take on that risk. That's why he gets insurance. He should be insuring himself against the possibility of some kind of catastrophe happening. Right of quiet enjoyment. You have a right. Usually in a lease, it needs to say when the landlord's going to come by and inspect the property. Most landlords, if they're wise, they're doing some kind of system where they're having someone come into the house monthly to change the filters on the air conditioning unit or whatever it may be, and that person's looking around. Are there dogs in here? Because people often go, I have a right for my pet. And it's like, no, you don't have a right to your pet. Well, it's a disability pet, and I got the certificate. Well, they're coming on to that scam, and that's not going to work. I'd imagine if you try to bring that up today and you really weren't disabled, and they're going to get you for fraud if you're trying to claim your pet as a disability pet. Right to privacy. You have a right, so you have also the right to not be, but you have a right that your landlord doesn't put up video cameras and films you in the house, okay? You have a right to privacy. We actually put less duties on the tenant, but these are very serious. You have a duty to preserve the premise. In other words, you got to keep it well maintained. You don't have a right to just destroy someone else's pieces of property and not have to pay for it. And the landlord can kick you out if you're destroying the property. That's why we put pet clauses in there, and if you violate the pet clause, they can kick you out. The pet is going to deteriorate that property faster than a person is. A duty to pay rent, okay? This is the key. You want to not be kicked out of your house, pay your rent. That basically will cover 90% of your obligations. So usually what's the problem? When the landlord's evicting someone, the tenant's not paying rent. They're not fulfilling their part of the agreement for whatever reason. I lost my job. Well, that's not the landlord's problem. Okay? Fulfill terms of the contract. Okay? You need to follow the lease, what it says, what you agreed to do. You read the lease, it said you weren't going to have a pet, and now, usually it has a remedy though, you have to pay more money or whatever, but you're getting evicted because it says in the lease you can get evicted for that, you're going to get evicted. Now that might differ with states because more states are imposing rights for pets and stuff like that. I have a problem here because my picture's going to block out some of the words here, I'm sorry. Can my landlord evict me for not paying rent because of COVID? Yes. Landlords are going to be able to evict you for not paying the rent. Now, I do subject that to if the landlord has received some kind of bailout, then you would have a right to know that information and use that if they received a bailout to compensate them for not receiving rent payments. So you would need to, in the lawsuit, serve a discovery request to find out if they received any money to help in that process. So if you're getting evicted right now, you might want to answer the lawsuit. Usually you have 21 days. In the state of Texas, that's what we do. I don't know. I guess I shouldn't say usually. Other states have different time, but you have to answer them. In other words, you need to fill out something and give it to the court so they know you're denying. You're saying, I do not. You can get an answer. Just type, I need an answer to an eviction, and type in your state and go to Google, and someone will have a form out there you can use. But you want to, after you answer, you want to send something in writing to your landlord demanding, you can actually type these in, discovery requests, and demand that they produce certain documents. Did you omit, or you can do, omit or deny, and you could even depose your landlord if you wanted to. Make their life miserable. You just Just feel like an attorney for a day. Can my landlord evict me if I get a dog? Yes. If that's the agreement that you agree to in the lease, absolutely. Do not try to claim a disability. That is one, disgusting, because there are actually disabled people that do need, and if you're abusing the law, I, as an attorney, if I found out that you were trying to do this and you were not actually disabled, I'm going to go full board after you. I'm going to go after you and get everything I can. Can the landlord just keep my deposit? No, this is where the landlords usually commit a crime, okay? I shouldn't say crime. This is where they breach the lease, okay? They can't keep your deposit. They have to use your deposit for fixing things. So if I was renting a piece of property, the first thing I would do is I would walk in with my camera and I would film every room, every piece of that property. Everywhere. You have a video camera on your phone. It is so easy to do because you want to get the exact condition at the time that you got in, because when they complain, oh, the carpets, we had to replace them, and you film these disgusting carpets when you walked in, you got the evidence to get your deposit back. And usually they have some requirements in states that you have to produce that what you use someone's deposit before, and you'll have they'll have a month to produce that to you. But no, they're not supposed to keep your deposit. Now, of course, if you ruin something, then that's what the landlord had the deposit for. Then you're gonna lose your deposit. That's why you keep the premise in good shape. Challenging an eviction. Okay. Here are some ideas you can use if you want to challenge an eviction. Notice to cure. Okay. Usually a lease agreement or the law requires some kind of time period to cure whatever it may be. You didn't pay rent, 10 days, whatever the state. They want to give you time to fix the problem. Okay. Notice to vacate. So usually in our states, in the state of Texas, 10 days. They have to send you a notice to vacate, and usually during that time period, you can also cure the defects. In other words, there is a lease agreement. You can go back and say, oh, here's all the money I owe you. I have fixed the problem. It's no longer an issue. A covenant of quiet enjoyment that still is in effect during an eviction process. If they show up and change your locks, these are all things that you can countersue for. But if you're going to countersue for something like that, it's going to cause a problem because the landlord's probably going to have more damages than you do. Right to privacy, you still have a right to privacy when you're challenging an eviction. Okay, they don't have a right to come in and install cameras or anything like that. What if the landlord defaults or dies? Okay, so what if the landlord defaults? I'm going to get a little bit more into this in just a minute, but I'm going to focus on dying. So we do not have contracts with property. You are renting a house. It doesn't go with the house. It goes with the landlord. Your lease is with the landlord. The person who takes over, the heirs of the estate, will probably have a right to get you out of the house. In other words, evict you. But you have rights to sue the estate for a breach of contract. So the estate is still in effect. You have to go after their estate and sue them in the probate court, and you have to make a claim that you were damaged because of that. But you got to understand, when your landlord dies or sells off a property, he no longer owns it, and but that doesn't mean you don't have rights to sue that person or his estate or her estate. What would I do if the house is going through a foreclosure? Now, this is something I would talk to an attorney. You get this foreclosure notice. Terrifying. It's like the house is going to be foreclosed on because the landlord's been taking your rent and he's been pocketing it. He's just taking it, putting it in his pocket. And this happened a lot in 2007, 2008, and 2009. So what would you do in this situation? Well, first off, I would talk to an attorney in the state. But if I was advising someone here in the state of Texas, I would place it in an escrow account. I put it in a savings account, because if you pay the landlord one of the months he gets foreclosed on, then you're going to have a serious problem on your hand. You're not going to be able to get the money from the landlord, and the bank's going to show up and go, "Where's our money?" So I would put it in a savings account. I would tell my landlord, you will receive payment after I check, this first Tuesday of the month, that you haven't been foreclosed on. So I wait till after the first Tuesday. Once I see, then I'll pay. Then I would pay my rent. Go, okay, you haven't been foreclosed on yet. I'm going to pay you. And you have a contract with the guy, so you got to keep paying him. All right. So if your landlord is foreclosed upon, okay, there is a Protecting Tenants at Foreclosure Act. It was reinstated, so you have rights to stay in the property until your lease is done, and you also, so that's something else to be aware of. Now, if you're buying a foreclosed house, you might have someone in there, and you have to honor their lease. Okay, and so I want to end that with thank you for watching. But if you are a tenant and you're having a problem with your landlord and he is trying to evict you, you can make his life very difficult by challenging things. Also, there's this thing going around right now, the ridiculousness of accusing landlords of being rich old evil people. Well, the reality of the situation is landlords are usually not extremely wealthy people. They're extremely in debt people. And without landlords, we would be in a serious problem in this country. About half this country cannot afford homes. So if we don't have landlords, then we're going to have a lot of people living in government housing, which are horrific things if you know that's being done anywhere. So that being the case, if you don't pay your landlord cannot pay their mortgage. If they can't pay their mortgage, they're going to get foreclosed on. If they get foreclosed on, if a lot of landlords do it, you won't be able to get a home. You are only harming yourself when you harm landlords. At the end of the day, they aren't rich. They don't have endless pockets. Most landlords use some kind of concept of they own a piece of property that's heavily indebted. They usually only have about 20% equity in that property, and they own 4 or 5 different properties, hoping someday that this will be their retirement. That is usually how a landlord works. They aren't these super wealthy people that are just sitting on loads and loads of cash. Okay? I mean, I remember just recently there was some girl out there and she was like, well, you know, if I pay my rent, doesn't mean I'm part owner in this property. No, it does not mean that. You did not buy the property. You got to go and purchase the property. You can go buy property. It is incredibly cheap now to buy property. You need to get your credit fixed. You need to make a certain amount of money, and you just need to play the game. Learn how it's played. You can get a piece of property, though, if you work a little bit harder, work another job. Well, I shouldn't say work harder. Some people work their butts off and make absolutely nothing. It's usually, I would say, work smarter. You know, look at your job, look at your career, look where you're going. If you have to get another job, get another job. Well, what if you have a family? What if things are difficult for you? Those are all things that you can go on the internet right now, and there are people with brilliant ideas that you can figure out. Remember, you can make far more money working for yourself. Like I watched one guy, all he did is he went and bought a bicycle with a passenger seat thing on the back with 2 people for $1,000, and he rode people around and was making around 10 grand a month just riding people around at night. Something as simple as that, you would be amazed at how many ideas out there that are so easy to do that no one wants to do because no one wants to work at night, that you can make really good money. Anyway, I went off on that a little bit at the end. This is already a 20-minute long video. I want you to understand you have rights as a tenant. Protect your right, but also at the same time, respect the landlord has rights too. And we can coexist in a very peaceful and loving environment where we realize that we're all in the boat together. It's the government that's evil.